Warsaw, Poland, winter of 2015. A family walks through the corridors of a monastic library open to the public, where silent display cases preserve manuscripts and facsimiles illuminated by soft light. The child, named Alex, only 7 years old, stops before a large-format reproduced page showing an ancient alphabet and a miniature with faded colors. He does not read the label or ask about the object's history. He simply brings his face closer with a tranquility that does not seem childish and declares to his mother, without drama and in the third person as is his custom, that a book is missing here, one that spoke of compassion as the supreme commandment, above all sacrifice. This gesture does not stem from a desire to impress, but from a certainty that orders his breathing in a rhythm different from the rest of the room. Elena, the mother, records the scene with a calm acquired over recent weeks. She notes the time, the room, and the position of the facsimile, just as she has recorded the nocturnal phrases the boy utters half asleep, addressed to no one, as if his mind were rehearsing a text not suited to his age. Daniel, the father, prefers a cautious silence and suggests continuing the tour, but he observes how Alex gazes at the letters as if hearing a voice behind the glass. In the family notebook, words recur, tied to light, mercy, and a teacher who demands not adoration but active fraternity. These are not memorized quotes or finely crafted phrases. They are fragments that return insistently and cling to the day like a persistent scent. The librarian responsible for the room, named Victor, has devoted decades to guarding monastic collections and private archives. He listens to the family with respect, without turning curiosity into a spectacle. He explains that the collection includes canonical Gospels in late editions, early translations, homilies, and commentaries, as well as some apocryphal texts known to scholars. He points to a map of provenances and notes that the history of sacred books is one of selection, copying, loss, and rescue. Elena understands that this explanation does not contradict what the child suggests. On the contrary, it places his words in a space where an unknown manuscript might have existed without forcing impossible chronologies. Prudence becomes an ally, not a barrier. Stepping out onto the street, the afternoon's cold raises a faint mist before each word. Alex walks between his parents with short, assured steps, as if holding an invisible object that must not fall. That evening, he draws on a sheet the silhouette of a book with a simple cover, a hanging lamp, and a table marked with knife scratches, as if the surface had previously served domestic tasks. He traces a line of text with signs that match no school alphabet and, without asking for help, comments in the third person that the teacher this book spoke of demanded care for widows and strangers before building tall structures for prayer. Elena does not correct, complete, or celebrate. She simply notes each detail to preserve the shape of this memory. The next day, Victor introduces the family to a researcher named Anna, a specialist in early Christian manuscripts and commentary traditions in Greek and Coptic. Anna proposes a simple framework to separate the possibility of an inner testimony from the temptation of a discovery promising headlines. She suggests searching for echoes, not immediate proofs. She opens an inventory of scattered leaves in European and Eastern libraries, described as homilies of uncertain authorship and fragments of communal teaching. The goal is not to name the unknown but to verify whether the motifs Alex repeats align with a teaching tradition that prioritizes mercy over ritual, concrete aid over rigid observance, and listening over punishment. The consultation table gathers copies of isolated pages, diplomatic transcriptions, and photographs in raking light. Alex does not touch the paper, but his gaze lingers on the margins where other ancient readers marked with hand signs a phrase about purity understood as justice for the weak. Anna explains to the family that this type of marginal notation, called a hand or index, guided monks and readers to fragments central to communal life. Elena understands that this way of highlighting seeks not abstract answers but rules for concrete care. The boy points to a gloss where a scribe noted that some words must be kept in the heart before being written on parchment, and the room fills with a silence that depends not on the lighting but on the density of what is understood without noise. With caution, Victor allows the family to view a storage room where boxes hold catalogued fragments. The conservator Laura places on an inert support a damaged leaf with barely visible letters and a lateral strip preserving traces of an old stitching. It is not a canonical gospel. It might be a page of commentary or a reading for the communal table. Anna notes that the content speaks of shared bread as the true liturgy, an idea present in preached traditions that were sometimes excluded from large volumes for reasons of internal politics, not lack of spiritual value. Elena understands that the lines between canonical and excluded are not always drawn by truth but by history, with its urgencies and powers. In the following nights, Alex's sleep follows a serene pattern. He does not speak in inner tongues or dramatize, but at dawn, he repeats in the third person that the teacher called for reconciliation before any offering and named the Father's house the place where no one was excluded for debts or ritual purity. Daniel, who maintained a responsible skepticism, notices that the boy seeks no admiration and does not change his mood when given no special attention. What he brings is neither a trick nor a game, it is a continuity expressed as a gentle duty. The family accepts Anna's guidance and avoids forcing identifications. The process chooses slowness as its method, for haste breaks the fragile thread of what might be true. The researcher proposes cross-referencing the boy's recurring phrases with collections of sayings attributed to Jesus, circulated in border communities where daily life demanded practical rules of hospitality. She does not seek a hidden gospel as a trophy, but a constellation of texts that might have nourished a book now lost or disassembled into practical notebooks. The analysis focuses on motifs, the insistence on mercy over sacrifice, fraternal correction before judgment, bread and water as signs surpassing any ornament, authority exercised through service rather than status. All these lines exist in known traditions, but here they appear with a coherence suggesting a domestic redaction, meant for the table and the street. To prevent the investigation from becoming a fantastical tale, Anna establishes 3 rules that the family naturally adopts. First, no phrase from the boy will be treated as a literal quotation, only as a thematic guide. Second, any echo found in manuscripts will be documented with date, provenance, and state of preservation. Third, associations with popular legends seeking glamour over truth will be avoided. Under these rules, the team constructs a table of motifs where each entry represents a line of communal life: hospitality, forgiveness, restitution, shared work, care for the sick, transparency in relations, sober speech. Elena, listening and noting, recognizes that this map resembles a guide to conduct more than a dogma. The boy looks at it and smiles with the serenity of one who has found the place where an old key fits. At the end of the first week, Elena suggests a brief pause to let the process breathe and to keep the family from living in anticipation of the next confirmation. They walk in a park filled with birches, eat warm bread in silence, and let the day be simply a day. Yet something has changed. Alex no longer touches books with the anxiety of one fearing their loss, but with the care of one who knows he will return to them when the time comes. The investigation does not promise a lost title in golden letters. It promises something simpler and harder: to reconstruct the voice of a community that chose practical love as a form of truth. In this horizon, the word gospel regains its meaning as good news, not secret but lived. Anna proposes continuing on a more arduous and less spectacular terrain, that of nearly invisible fragments surviving in domestic notebooks, homiliaries with mismatched leaves, and palimpsests where later writing covered earlier teaching with practical prayers. She explains that if a communal gospel existed, placing mercy as the supreme law, its trace might remain in readings for the shared table, in catecheses for initiates, or in practical notebooks used by small groups. Victor gathers digital copies of rarely consulted collections and, with the conservator Laura's help, requests permissions to closely examine pieces with marginal notes resembling lists of simple instructions for daily life. Elena understands that the search does not chase a glittering title, but a constellation of details that together will outline the silhouette of a voice. The conservation room welcomes the team with raking light, low tables, and inert supports holding fragile leaves. Laura places on the table a leaf with faded writing and a lateral strip where old stitching shows the rhythm of one who hand-sewed notebooks. The main text appears to be a reading of exhortations, but in the lower margin, traces of an earlier carefully erased text are visible. Anna explains that reading erasures requires caution, as imagination often fills gaps, and proposes working with multispectral imaging to discern traces the eye cannot see. During this process, Alex maintains a serene presence, not pressing for results. He merely observes the margins as if the ink were still warm. When the first images arrive, A line emerges from beneath the later writing with unexpected clarity. Anna reads softly, without theatricality, a sequence linking bread, water, and forgiveness before speaking of assemblies and solemn vows. It is not a canonical quote, nor an extravagant invention. It belongs to that family of exhortations tying teaching to daily practice. Victor compares the formula to collections of sayings and finds partial parallels in known sources, though the economy of words here is more domestic, more for the table than the pulpit. Elena senses that this tone aligns with the boy's breath when he speaks in the third person of reconciliation before any offering. There is no triumph, only a door slightly ajar. To keep the thread intact, Anna switches tables and requests another damaged notebook from a smaller collection. Laura presents a set of leaves with old oil stains, suggesting reading in contexts where food was cooked and served, not in solemn libraries. On a lateral margin, a second hand copied in tight letters an admonition placing justice in relations above external purity, and calling for the stranger arriving in the rain not to be rejected. Daniel, who held the rope of caution, silently acknowledges that this phrase dialogues with the motif map the team built the previous week. Paul, consulted remotely, suggests that this semantic density points to a tradition of practical sayings rather than an extended homily. The next day brings a different exercise. Anna proposes to Alex a recognition game without words. Transcribed fragments from various traditions, some canonical, others from sayings collections, others from late commentaries, are presented one by one, all unidentified. The boy must indicate with his gaze which ones breathe the same air as those he described at dawn. Elena agrees on the condition that no one celebrates successes or marks errors, only the steadiness of the pulse matters. The result surprises by its sobriety. Alex calmly selects short fragments linking shared bread, restitution before ritual, and care for the sick as true worship. He does not choose passages promising exemplary punishments or those turning teaching into complex allegories. His criterion, inexplicably firm, keeps the thread in the small. From this pattern, Anna reconstructs a thematic index and notes that several motifs repeat with particular economy: not swearing by lofty things, speaking with sober words, working with hands to have something to give, sharing bread without humiliation, restoring before offering, correcting with patience without spectacle. Each line exists in recognized traditions, but their sum, as the boy points to, sounds like a communal compendium, a handbook for houses where faith is lived at the level of water, table, and rest. Victor notes that this form, if it ever took shape as a book, may never have had a solemn title. Perhaps it was a domestic collection copied by a community until worn out. Elena understands that the greatness of this possible gospel lies in its humility. To explore the materiality of this humility, Laura suggests examining patches, stitches, and signs of use betraying daily reading. In a notebook with thin wooden covers and simple leather, knife marks and wine stains appear. These are not decorations but traces of a living table. On a central page, a clumsy hand copied an admonition about leaving offense at the door before entering to eat, and in the margin, an anonymous reader added that shared bread heals the tongue that wounds. This combination of text and gloss seems a snapshot of a house striving to learn to live better. Anna proposes treating this notebook as a window into what they seek, not a book expelled with fanfare but a text that, too practical, disintegrated in use. To take a further step, the team decides not to chase spectacular names. Instead, they will build a provisional edition of motifs, a fabric of short phrases united by semantic affinity and shared breath. Alex will be the control reader for cadence, not doctrine. When a fragment breaks the pulse, it will be set aside without debate. Elena accepts that this work will require patience, as the truth of a voice is not captured in one go. Daniel supports the logistics, Victor ensures documentation, Laura guards material integrity, and Anna steers the course with a blend of method and faith in the small. The work table, with its lamps and folders, begins to resemble the table described by the fragments. Amid this process, a useful difficulty arises. A late leaf, neat and doctrinal, offers a list of strict precepts wrapped in persuasive phrases. On paper, it looks compelling, but in soft reading, the cadence breaks. Alex gently turns his gaze away, as if recognizing a foreign music. Anna removes the leaf from the set without making it a judgment. She explains that sometimes tradition dons impressive garments, but ceases to breathe as a community. This exclusion, far from weakening the search, sharpens the contours of what they gather, a word that organizes life without spectacle, preferring the modest gesture to the grandiose precept, verifiable at the table, in the workshop, and on the street. By the week's end, the provisional edition takes shape. It has no title or author, only a recognizable voice placing mercy as the law of laws and ordering worship around bread, water, forgiveness, and honest work. Anna writes a minimal prologue clarifying that they present not a find for display but a living hypothesis, a humble reconstruction meant for use, not contemplation. She suggests reading this set softly, like one who cooks, cleans, teaches a child, or visits the sick. Elena understands that if an excluded gospel ever existed, it may not have been banished by scandal, but absorbed by life until indistinguishable from the gestures it supports. In this recognition, the search finds rest without closing. Anna decides to subject the provisional edition to a test that depends not on enthusiasm but on resilience. She proposes reading it softly, once daily for several days, noting whether the set retains its pulse when the mind is tired, the day heavy, or the mood craves distraction. The voice they weave must sustain communal life, not just impress at first reading. Elena embraces this discipline and for a week, reads the fragments while cooking, tidying the house, or preparing the boys' backpack. At each day's end, she notes in a notebook whether a line stumbles on reality, a precept rings hollow, or the proposed mercy becomes impractical. The surprise is discreet and firm. The set seems born for this use, as if each phrase was written at a table's foot. Victor, for his part, seeks an external contrast not reliant solely on contemporary habits. Through an old catalog, he locates a small community in the country's south that preserves domestic reading notebooks copied across generations, not from erudition but custom. With the conservator Laura's mediation, he requests permission to view some notebooks in the parish house without moving them. The community agrees on condition that the visit be sober and without intrusive cameras. Anna prepares a short list of motifs to check affinities without forcing comparisons. Upon arrival, the family finds a room with a wooden table marked by years of bread and knives and a hanging lamp casting clear light over notebooks with simple covers. The first opened notebook smells of old paper and wax. Its pages show tight letters and marginal glosses, with hands varying in firmness by the scribe's age. At a page's center, a very brief admonition calls for restoring good to a brother before public prayer. In the margin, another hand added that shared bread teaches prayer without words. The coincidence with the provisional edition is not literal, but breathes the same air. Anna does not proclaim a discovery. She only notes that the cadence is similar, the order of priorities aligns, and the tone avoids rhetorical grandeur. Elena senses that this sobriety respects both the notebooks and the boy, who observes silently with hands clasped on the table. In a second notebook, cloth patches and wine stains appear, signs of use during communal meals. One leaf shows a minimal list of gestures before the table: reconciling, washing, sitting without preference, sharing without humiliation, keeping a peace for the absent. The provisional edition contains similar motifs, though worded differently. Paul, consulted later, notes that this convergence of practices in distant contexts suggests a shared tradition not always recorded in history's great volumes. The family understands that the gospel they seek may not have been violently expelled but forgotten, as the domestic rarely reaches the display case. The next test is not textual but bodily. The priest guarding the notebooks explains that, in this community, on some winter evenings, short phrases are read, and the described gesture is practiced silently. That afternoon, he suggests reading one of the reconstructed fragments and observing whether the body responds naturally. The chosen phrase speaks of asking forgiveness before the table. The group falls silent, and almost without signal, those present rise, approach one another, bow their heads, and sit again. Elena feels this simple obedience is worth more than any argument. Anna, with learned discretion, notes that the true word is recognized because the body understands it before the mind explains it. Back in the city, the provisional edition receives an adjustment that does not alter its spirit but gives it a clearer backbone. Anna reorganizes the motifs into 4 threads capable of sustaining a house, shared bread, reconciliation, honest work, and sober speech. Each thread holds short phrases, minimal glosses, and a practical example. Elena reads the set from start to finish and senses the voice does not lose its tone when traversed without pause. Daniel, the guardian of caution, admits the text does not urge belief but living. This difference explains why it may never have had a proper name in great history. It sought not to impose itself as a book, but to dissolve like leaven. Laura then suggests subjecting some leaves to a stricter material examination, not for exact dates but to understand supports, inks, and copying habits. In the laboratory, under controlled light, fibers, patches, and fingerprints are observed. The inks show variations matching domestic refills, not professional workshops. The margins, worn by constant rubbing, confirm repeated reading. One leaf stands out with a lateral strip bearing stitching remnants, indicating modest notebooks assembled without pretension. This material poverty does not discredit the content. On the contrary, it places it in the home, the place the text demands. Anna notes in her book that a book's truth can be measured by the fingers that touched it. It remains to narrate the most delicate movement. One morning, Alex wakes with a serenity that took weeks to arrive. He speaks no visions, recites no phrases, asks for no books. He sits at the table, eats bread calmly, and then places his hand on the notebook where Elena copied the provisional edition. He says in the third person, with the serenity of a child who knows his place, that this book is complete for a house's use. He asks for no name, claims no ownership. Anna understands the process has reached its first rest, not its end. The family decides to keep the set without publishing it as a find, but to share it with those who wish to practice it. The good news becomes again a lived news. The academic work continues through formal channels. Victor drafts a sober report documenting sources, methods, and limits, sending it to a committee that typically hears borderline cases without prejudice. Laura adds material observations and photographs seeking no spectacle. Paul appends a linguistic annex on cadences and semantic fields. The verdict is not a judgment, but an invitation to keep observing. It acknowledges a line of practical tradition, confirms the set's coherence, and honestly notes that great history may never offer conclusive proof. Anna receives the response with gratitude, as it affirms that the most fertile ground for truth is patience. At home, the provisional edition rests on a low shelf, within reach of small hands. Each afternoon, Elena reads a line and proposes a gesture to accompany it, like sharing fruit, calling a neighbor, setting the table without preference, or keeping a peace for the absent. The text claims no brilliance, it claims companionship. In this rhythm, Alex stops seeking extraordinary signs and begins recognizing the presence of good in repetition. If there was ever a gospel history excluded, its return takes not the form of a display case but of a table with enough bread. The winter passes without fanfare, and the house learns to breathe in the rhythm of a voice that lived hidden in the margins.